name's Jordan. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands the UTS City campus is located. And I'd also like to pay respect to elders both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. I'm a recent NICE Hub PhD candidate, and my research will be looking at the governance drivers and barriers to creating a thriving circular nutrient economy of scale in Australia. Some of the outcomes from my PhD will be to investigate leading international governance structures for nutrient and non-nutrient circular economies, to identify and analyse governance barriers that are currently limiting how stakeholders can integrate well into nutrient circular economies within the Australian context, as well as understanding the perceptions of stakeholders in the circular nutrient value chain and how these perceptions enable or impede the effective governance of circular nutrient economies. I have a background in law and social sciences, and I'm looking to bring my experiences in these disciplines to the research being conducted in the NICE Hub over the coming years. Our global food system is failing us. This is for a wide range of reasons, but one is what brings us all here today. The fact that our conventional, chemical, and commercial fertilisers are responsible for and increasingly causing widespread socio-ecological damage. The impacts range from soil acidification, large-scale eutrophication events that lead to aquatic dead zones, as well as disruptions to global food supply chains, which was witnessed in 2008 when the price of phosphate rock spiked by 800%, driving a sharp increase in the cost of food and triggering concern over the long-term security of global phosphate rock reserves. One solution that has been presented to address the wicked problem of a failing food system is a circular nutrient economy, which sits within the broader circular or organic value chain depicted on the slide here, which Dana presented earlier this morning. A circular nutrient economy will require increased recovery of nutrients from organic waste streams such as human urine for reuse as renewable fertilisers, among other benefits, and I don't need to reiterate them because we've heard them so many times, but a circular nutrient economy can improve soil health and biodiversity rates, increase harvests, reduce unsustainable water practices, and reduce harmful contaminants from our food, such as heavy metals and antimicrobial resistant diseases. However, one of the key problems to achieving nutrient circularity is the lack of coordination among a diverse range of stakeholders. This is not therefore a technological problem, it is a governance problem. It is in 2019, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development released a report, and one of the findings within that was that governance is one of the fundamental barriers to establishing effective and scalable circular economies more broadly, which includes circular nutrient economies. Here, the OECD uses governance as a broad term that captures the categories of funding, regulatory, policy, awareness, and capacity gaps. In the literature, few people have accounted for the challenges in establishing circular nutrient economies as a governance challenge, and my research over the course of my NICE Hub PhD will therefore add much to understanding and paving the way for rectifying this coordination problem. Unfortunately, I do not yet have the solutions to present to you on a silver plate because I am yet to start my research journey. Bearing that in mind, today I'd like to offer you some insights on the governance of a circular economy more broadly that I and colleagues from the UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures discovered during a recent research project. The case study for our project focused specifically on the governance of different precinct types, of which eco-industrial parks are a prominent example. This has substantial implications for governing the circular nutrient economy, because the two concepts of an eco-industrial park and circular nutrient economy are not mutually exclusive. For example, it may be possible to set up a local nutrient economy as an eco-industrial park, where food waste and wastewater are collected, treated, and processed into local fertiliser to meet local agricultural demands. We heard from Lisa this morning. There's a lot of focus from the United Nations Industrial Development Organisation on the role that eco-industrial parks and other precincts can play in shift to circular economies. One of the key outputs from this research included understanding the challenges involved in governing precincts, like eco-industrial parks, which we uncovered by investigating key governance drivers and barriers through a literature review of international best precinct governance practices. For context, an eco-industrial park is an industrial park in which co-located firms venture on intentional sharing of materials, energy, water, and information to seek economically and environmentally beneficial outcomes for reduced use of virgin materials, technology improvements, for resource efficiency and cleaner production, and alternative applications for byproducts and waste. This kind of resource sharing in eco-industrial park settings is called industrial symbiosis, a concept borrowed from the broader discipline of industrial ecology. Industrial symbiosis focuses on material flows through networks of businesses and other organisations in local and regional economies to approach ecologically sustainable industrial development. Resource sharing through symbiotic relationships is a vital component of a circular nutrient economy, as each transaction along the nutrient value chain will need to be mutually beneficial for each party to see value in contracting with one another. Unfortunately, governance practices and institutions are notoriously difficult to analyse due to them being highly abstract, and because there are often invisible arrangements and interests at play that are not obvious or open to all parties. As stated by Sharp and Raven when commenting on the governance of precincts, they state that it is strategically focused, yet complex and ambiguous, requiring navigation of complex social and organisational settings with fluid boundaries of who is involved, and acknowledging the limited controllability of precinct planning processes, drawing on strategic budgets as well as opportunistic resource opportunities as they emerge through actors coming in and out of the processes. The stakeholders along the nutrient value chain, ranging from policymakers and regulators, wastewater and treatment providers, fertiliser producers, farmers, and the broader community, are struggling to connect and communicate their operations effectively because our current systems are not set up for them to communicate effectively, thereby preventing them from realising the shared benefits that a circular nutrient economy presents. For example, wastewater treatment plants are still primarily focused on removing and disposing of, rather than recovering large quantities of nutrients before they become effluents in our waterways. Contrastingly, fertiliser producers would ideally have access to an industrial volume of nutrient-rich urine for use in renewable fertilisers, but have few avenues to access this urine due to incongruous legal and regulatory barriers across Australian state and territory jurisdictions. To unpack this coordination problem, I'd like to explain the similarities between the challenges involved in governing an eco-industrial park compared with a circular nutrient economy, remembering again that the two are not mutually exclusive concepts. Firstly, eco-industrial parks tend to develop organically over time, often with limited government oversight, and contain multiple stakeholders with different interests and motivations. As mentioned before, there are many stakeholders in the circular nutrient economy. However, these stakeholders are not effectively communicating their interests and motivations to each other, leading to bottlenecks in the nutrient supply chain. Furthermore, a successful eco-industrial park requires an adaptable governance framework to manage intricate and dynamically evolving social and organisational relationships. Similarly, developing a circular nutrient economy can shift with the political will of the day and is vulnerable to changing cultural norms, political ideologies, and conflicting legislative frameworks. To be resilient to these changes, a circular nutrient economy governance framework must also be adaptable and have a certain level of flexibility as it is moulded over time. Lastly, within an eco-industrial park, there needs to be a clear hierarchy of roles and responsibilities for different stakeholders that identifies the material flows and economic incentives of those within the park. An important component of my PhD is understanding the guardians responsible for overseeing the performance and coordination of the whole nutrient value chain. Is it local, state, or federal government? Is it wastewater treatment plants, fertiliser producers? Perhaps it is you and I, considering that it is our urine being used in these fertilisers. What is the structure of this hierarchy, and what roles will each stakeholder play in achieving a common goal? Evidently, you see similar challenges in a discussion surrounding the governance of the circular nutrient economy, as you do the governance of an eco-industrial park. With these similarities in mind, let's now discuss the common drivers and barriers to establishing a successful eco-industrial park, which may provide us with insights into the drivers and barriers of the circular nutrient economy. Examples of governance drivers to implementing an eco-industrial park include building trust, by creating an environment where stakeholders actively build partnerships, communicate regularly, and engage in dialogue. Supportive government policies, incentives, and institutions, which enable the scaling of symbiotic relationships and a transition towards sustainable development. infrastructure and amenities, providing high-quality physical environments, transportation infrastructure, digital connectivity, and supporting research and innovation activities enhance the overall attractiveness and competitiveness of the precinct. On the other hand, some barriers to developing and establishing the eco-industrial park include managing stakeholder dynamics, which can hinder objective setting, decision-making and coordination, data sharing and management, which is critical for meeting ambitions, but can be hindered by traditional business practices, competitiveness, or fear of revealing weaknesses. And lastly, costs and legal complexities, which can deter engagement, undermine transparency, and hinder plan implementation. Based on the findings from this case study of an eco-industrial park and precincts, there is not likely to be a blueprint, one-size-fits-all approach to governing a circular nutrient economy in Australia. Different factors, such as geography and having a supportive regulatory environment, will act as some of the drivers and barriers. For example, the size of Australia makes it very difficult, logistically speaking, to transport raw materials compared with other countries. Some countries in the EU are often praised for their efforts with the circular economy, but they face a different geography to Australia. Hence the appeal of setting up a localised circular nutrient economy in an eco-industrial park setting where different stakeholders are co-located. Additionally, because Australia has a federal system, the way the departments of health, environment, our plumbing codes, all of these processes are going to be regulated in different settings depending on each state and territory's legal systems. A more unified national legislative system would therefore go a long way to creating a frictionless circular nutrient economy. One of the key takeaways from our research on the governance of these different precinct types that can be drawn back to a circular nutrient economy is that we must start to encourage dialogue around how we can think about different stakeholders along the entire nutrient value chain and how these stakeholders interact at different levels. The solution to our problems will not be solved through technology alone. Indeed, I think this is one of the major pitfalls of our relationship with science across history. We believe it will come through for us at 1 minute to midnight and save us from the systemic mistakes we've made across decades. Reaching our shared goal will also require us to understand how we relate to one another, and I believe this can be uncovered by studying the governance of a circular nutrient economy. Moving forward with my PhD, I'd like to explore in more detail the role that different circular nutrient economy stakeholders, particularly utilities companies, fertiliser producers and local communities, play within eco-industrial park settings, as well as the kinds of industrial symbioses that might exist between them and others. I might add that that was just stage one of a multi-year project that we're working on with our client. Stage two of our research will also involve stakeholder engagement, so there are indeed opportunities to pose these kinds of questions to government, industry, and community stakeholders to better understand these drivers and barriers as they apply to a circular nutrient economy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jordan, very much. Excellent presentation. We have time for several questions. Anyone to start? Okay.
You mentioned the Guardians. Do you have any insight yet about who some of those key Guardians might be?
I mean, I think our traditional way of thinking about governance is a top-down approach to governance, but there's some very limited literature around circular economy governance, but some that is coming out suggests that we need a top-down and a bottom-up approach through network governance. Those kinds of approaches are going to be very important. But also drawing from other disciplines that have established understandings of different governance types. I went along to the Australian Circular Economy Forum earlier this year, and one of the speakers there was a gentleman called Dean Sanders. He's an Aboriginal elder, and he talked about fractal approaches to governance. And this idea that, which is embedded in First Nations communities, the idea that you can have more resilient governance systems by having multiple governance systems happening within the same broader picture. If one falls down for whatever reason, there's resilience with the system because we all have, you know, a guiding North Star towards a broader vision. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunities to draw from other disciplines to start to understand circular economy governance more broadly.
Any other question?
I'll just comment. Hey, just an observation, probably more so than a question, but just next door at the start of the session, Aldo talked about ecosystem approach to this question. So I guess as someone who likes to kind of join the dots, I'm sort of keen to see how these two sort of conversations talk to each other as the nice hub progresses. So
Yeah, definitely. Myself and Dana, we're actually working with Aldo at the workshop later this afternoon. Circular economy, ecosystems, circular nutrient economies. I think similar language, similar ideas. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities to kind of nurture that relationship with Aldo and his colleagues at Griffith, and also in Brazil at the University of Sao Paulo. Yeah, there's definitely opportunities to nurture those relationships over the coming years.
Jordan, thank you for your presentation. It was great. Now, is there a reason why you have focused on governance? Is it due to the fact that decisions are made by those governing? And do you think that there's a role on leadership? And in terms of leadership, I mean, it could be anybody who takes on the mantle of leadership and leading. Yeah, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's sometimes the chance that no one fills that position and then nothing gets done, but also how do we get all the different stakeholders in the room and getting that expertise built into the leadership model. Within our broader report where we looked at different precinct kind of governance models, we also developed a typology framework to kind of describe different governance models, which I didn't have time to present today. But as a part of that, we looked at different attributes of precinct types. For example, Kalundborg in Denmark is like the golden child of eco-industrial parks. And we looked, that also evolved organically over time. So that leadership model kind of shaped over decades. But within all the kind of top performing eco-industrial parks, we did find that there was kind of a unified council that was responsible for disseminating information and kind of speaking on behalf of all of those different stakeholders. So there definitely is a role for, like, similar to Circular Australia. Like, you need someone there, but it's important that they don't just take over and start to shape the narrative themselves, that they're constantly drawing on expertise from different parties. Yeah.
Thank you.
Question up the back. Just wondering what, how much you've seen examples of eco-industrial parks by design as opposed to ones that have just grown organically, and whether there's many examples, and if so, what role I guess the land use planning process had in making a structured space for that.
Yeah, funnily enough, there's pretty few examples of developing greenfield kind of sites in eco-industrial parks. The more successful ones have developed organically over time, and that's why we've been brought in to consult in this project to kind of learn from those examples to see if we can kind of build up those parks within Australia, because with our sustainability commitments over the coming years, we're trying to meet that. But yeah, you raised a really good point about the different planning processes, and I guess talking about different governance approaches. That top-down approach where government is kind of being there, they're providing the land, for example. How can we get them to, you know, they're putting up the money originally, but how can we get them to also step back and let other players within that space, you know, make these operations happen? So it is a difficult space. Know that it's relatively rare that you do find these parks being set up in greenfield sites, but it's definitely something that we're exploring.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, I think we'll end here. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you very much.